We need in every community a group of angelic troublemakers.
Social justice, power hour, power hour, power hour. Social justice, power hour, power hour, power hour.
Welcome back to the Power Hour. Good evening to our friends on the East Coast. Good afternoon to our friends on the West, and good in-between times to our friends in the in-between spaces. Welcome, indeed, to the Social Justice Power Hour. Welcome to the virtual headquarters of the Bayard-Rustin Center for Social Justice. My name is Robert Schreiber. I'm the chief activist here and your host for this evening, as I have been on this journey for the past year. Every single weeknight, we've come to you live on the Power Hour without missing a beat. Welcome. Thank you for joining us in virtual community tonight. We are celebrating this year with meaningful moments and inspirational times with extraordinary folks who have dropped by, made all the more extraordinary by you sharing virtual community with us. So make sure you drop by tomorrow night for great performances, and each and every weeknight thereafter at 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific for more virtual community here on the Social Justice Power Hour. We'll be here for you. Please be here for us. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, and each and every night. Enjoy these moments, everybody. Much love and respect.
Of course, you might ask, like, well, what is that one thing? And the answer is, I don't know how to name it. The only way I had to name it was to write the book. That there was something about language, about embodiment, about empowerment as somebody who is told to be one thing or another thing, about resisting certain kinds of narratives, about being a target, about being illegible, unreadable in some way to the cis hetero white supremacist world, as a mixed race person. There's something about this story that is very much about, on the one hand, existing beyond language and trying to build a life in some way beyond language. And there's also something that is about the search for sacredness, that is about trying to locate and experience or access the divine in oneself as a person who is doing that. And there is something in this book about how those two things are actually the same thing. Even the title, The 30 Names of Night, came out of a sort of epic Sufi poem called The Conference of the Birds, that is about the search for the divine. And a lot of people will already know this, but that the story is essentially that this large group of birds gathers to choose their king. And they decide they're going to seek out this legendary bird, the simurgh, that is sort of a figure sort of like the phoenix, you could imagine, or the roc in Arab traditional storytelling. And they go to seek out the simurgh, and in the end, most of the birds give up. And in the end, when they reach the simurgh, there's only 30 birds left. And you realize that in Persian, 30 birds is actually what simurgh means. And so the simurgh, which is this sort of representation of the divine, is actually a reflection of the seekers. And I think in some way, the whole of this book is actually trying to get at that as a person who is rejected as unreadable or illegible by the society in which they live, and told explicitly that we are not allowed to access or reflect the divine or the sacred in our personhood, in our embodiment, in our lives, in our loving of each other, or friendship or anything. Where does the path lie in seeking that? How do we even go about doing that? And so I think there are all of these disparate threads in the book, but they all come back in a way to that, to say it is possible to build a life outside of this legibility. It is possible to find the divine in oneself as a trans person, as a mixed race person, but more specifically as a person who is not legible in a way that's acceptable to the world around you.
How important is sex positivity, and more specifically, queer sex positivity?
Well, my relationship to it goes back to, I think of this language as coming out of when I first got to college, and the AIDS epidemic had already begun. This was like 1985. And that was when I first started encountering the idea of sex positive in relationship to queerness. And it was specifically around trying to reclaim sex after the terror and fear and death that had came up in that era related to AIDS and HIV, back when we only had one drug and it wasn't that good to try and treat this illness. So it was this very interesting period for me where I was, I had just come out of the closet to myself, and then increasingly to others, and was doing these kinds of I guess now we would call them sensitivity training sessions. They basically involved guiding a group of fellow students, in a pretty interesting role play where they had to identify personally as, and it was all posited as like, we're all going to take on a fictional queer identity. So everyone had to introduce themselves and say, I am so-and-so, I am a gay man, lesbian, bisexual, and so on. It was I don't recall that trans was included in that category, which is part of a comment on the 80s, I think. It was a period when actually trans people were still sadly fighting to be included in those kinds of settings, even though they had been consistently leaders of the movement throughout. So it was this sort of awful, I didn't know it at the time because I was 18 years old and just showing up. It would only be years later when I would learn about how that struggle had played out. And I think it would have really changed how even my whole relationship to the idea of being an activist, to have known that then. So it's why I'm so glad that we have been emphasizing this as a part of our history of late, insisting on educating people about the central role of trans people in our movement.
Like, I didn't feel comfortable coming out. Part of it was because of how I felt with my sports teams, like it was just, and of course, so many of the people on my team ended up being queer also, which is hilarious. But like at the time we were all closeted and confused and like scared. And I think that's a very common experience in sports. And I hope it's becoming less of a common experience as we advance through time. But like so anyway, in doing all this research, what I found was that sports are still an incredibly not welcoming place for queer people, especially for trans people and for non-binary people. And so there was part of me that when I went into the avant-garde, I was like, I'm going to do this whole storyline about like what it's really like being a trans athlete. And then as the story started to take shape, I realized that that's not really the story that I'm telling here. This is really a story about like friendship and acceptance and like this team that's trying to exist. Like the team shouldn't even exist. It's this art school that doesn't do sports. So they're like already trying to like do something that's really difficult just by even having this team. And then it's cute because they compete against other like like specialty colleges and like art schools. So they compete against like a veterinary college, and like the halftime show is like dogs. It's cute stuff like that. And they compete against like a culinary school, and like the exterior of it looks like a cheesecake factory. So it's like cute. It's like, you know, I wanted to create something that was like really, really cute and kind of wholesome. And I was like, I don't want this to be about these characters struggling. I don't want my, you know, like there's a non-binary character, there's a trans character. I didn't want those characters, their storylines to be all about how shitty everything was. And I know that that is the reality for so many people. And I kind of looked to the show Schitt's Creek, and Dan Levy, the way he explains that universe is that it's a place that's more idealized. There isn't homophobia, there isn't transphobia, there isn't racism. It's just not a part of the show, and it's not a part of that community. And I kind of adopted that approach. I was like, I want to tell this story, and I want these characters to thrive and feel joy and get to just grow up and find themselves in a way that isn't burdened by what would be the reality in real life. So I just wanted, and it's young adult too, and I wanted like younger people, I wanted kids to see that version of reality. Like maybe there's a version like that we can get to. Maybe there's examples of that we can point to. So yeah, gosh, I'm like, did I actually answer the question? I'm like, I feel like I'm going crazy.
And what I want to say is this. I think you can put it really succinctly. What you did was you have created a safe space in comic book form.
I hope so.
And
my journey into social justice work, in some ways, I often tell people that I got it honest. So I come from, a family, my mom's side of the family, where, people have just histories of activism. Their long line of AME, which is African Methodist Episcopal Church, members and reverends, frankly, on my mom's side of the family, going back into slavery, frankly. My mom's family's from Tennessee and Kentucky, West Virginia. And, several of my family members were involved in different kinds of civil rights, desegregation work. One of my great aunt was a registered nurse married to my great uncle, who was an AME minister. And when they had a church in the Bay Area in the 1960s, my aunt helped the Black Panthers kind of set up their clinics in the late 60s, early 70s. And then my mom, we grew up, I'm from Cleveland, Ohio, grew up primarily in a housing project on the east side of Cleveland. But my mom was, also an activist, had been a rank and file member of the Cleveland Black Panther Party when she was very young, when she was a teenager. And then later did some activism around, kind of housing conditions in the project I lived in. She also was a big kind of anti-Chief Wahoo symbol, if you know that sort of work in the Cleveland Indians. So I kind of had it, in my family, and both sides of my family, people just really love to talk and debate politics. I sort of grew up with that. Now, I thought I was going to be a performing artist. I went to undergrad for theater. Studied theater, graduated from Ohio Wesleyan University in 1997, moved back to Cleveland initially, and taught Shakespeare in high schools and did shows, productions at night, moved to New York in 1999, was doing theater in New York and working. And then over time, it just became less, doing another sort of Shakespeare production became less prescient to me as, I moved to New York about a month before Amadou Diallo was killed in the South Bronx, and about a year and a half before 9/11 happened, or 2 years before 9/11 happened, actually. So, once those things started to happen, I started to sort of shift my attention and focus to doing social justice work and organizing work around kind of criminalization issues, police brutality, criminalization of queer youth in New York City, and kind of got into HIV work through that, work as well. And, have worked with a number of organizations from Fierce to Critical Resistance to was the executive director of Queers for Economic Justice. and and as I mentioned before, treatment action group, and now working as the editor of the Body. So that's kind of where I've come.
I'm talking too much. I'm putting myself in the corner. I'm putting baby in the corner. It's all you.
Okay, so I have the mansplainer, and this is the guy who explains things to you, usually to women, but anyone can be on the receiving end of mansplaining. And it's about something that you are more experienced, more knowledgeable in, and it's unsolicited and unwanted feedback. You didn't ask for it. They just, do it. They can't help themselves. And then I have the concern troll, who is the guy who uses faux concern for you to undermine you and to belittle you. He says things like, I agree with what you're saying, but you're too angry, or no one's going to listen if you're using swear words, or that guy. I have the comedian. He's the guy who explains your own jokes to you, but he's also the guy who gets very upset when you don't laugh at his jokes, which are lazy, racist, sexist. They're just like the terrible jokes. They're not funny. And he's the guy who says things like, you just don't get comedy. This is edgy humor, that kind of thing. The sexpert. He is the cis guy who explains your own body to you, like your periods and things like that. The patronizer uses your emotions against you. He's the guy who says things like, I can't talk to you if you're going to get hysterical. That guy. So those are the 5 types of gentlemen in the book.
So let's look at another piece. And one of these, this is one of my favorites. Now, I don't know, is this in the book or is this from the Instagram?
That's on my Instagram, yeah.
Again, this will be bonus content.
Yeah, bonus.
Just print this out and put it in the book yourself. So he is saying to her, you're so beautiful, you don't even know it. And she said, I do know it. And then he pivots. So this is who is this? Because I think this is this is the pivoter. This is a new breed.
This is the asshole. He's probably what would he be? Like the concern troll, maybe? A little bit of like, you're too full of yourself. People aren't going to take you seriously. That kind of guy, maybe?
I don't know. I think
also talking down to you.
I think this is for the sequel. I think this is for Life 2, Electric Boogaloo. And I think that this is a new breed.
A new guy. He's the pivoter. I love it.
I like and you can use that. You can use the pivoter. You can use that. I give that to you free of charge. And that's a bit of mansplaining right there. Here's the next book. Thank you. Thank you.
Happening in the wild.
Because I don't think it's useful, right, for folks to look and say, oh my God, look what Malcolm did. What I hope the takeaway is, particularly for young people, is, oh my God, look what I can do. Because the reality is, one of the bravest things you can do, and one of the most powerful things you can do, is actually walk into spaces as yourself, as your full self, right? Because I don't know what age it is where we tell kids growing up, be who you are, be exactly who you are. And then at some age, right, that shifts. And they start getting these messages about who they're supposed to be, about how they're supposed to show up, about how they should identify, how they should look, who they should be with. And what that ends up doing is really starving us of examples of authenticity, of examples of folks who are incredibly powerful, not in spite of who they are, but because of who they are. And so I hope young people in particular, that you never allow that second part of that message to seep in. Who you are is wonderful. Who you are is needed. And who you are really can change the world. I hate saying that, it sounds frou-frou-la, but it's not frou. Who you are really can change the world.
If you're a queer person living in the United States, your life, by the nature of our existence, is poetic. Every queer person is a walking poem. It's just true. I grew up in the South, in Texas. My mother's side is from Kentucky. My father's side is from Oklahoma. And so, I came from a more conservative background. I was raised in trailer parks in Central Texas. We were dirt poor. There were plenty of issues to deal with. and my gender identity at the time was not something I understood as well. And so, I'm almost tearing up now because I think of, all of the 12 and 14-year-olds in Central Texas who are dealing with this now, who are in the closet and have to stay there because of the environments they live in. For years of my life, I steadfastly ran away from who I was. I wanted to be the kind of person who just fit in. I was never a rebel. I was always the kid who did my homework and showed up on class on time and listened to my teachers and all that. And the reason is I wanted to just be accepted. And I knew internally that I was not someone whose authenticity would be readily accepted by the adults around me. And so instead I tried to rebel against the idea of who I was inside. And so, I did every masculine rite of passage. I lifted weights. I played football in high school. I did everything I could, culturally, I would say, to kind of cleanse myself of this need to be a woman, because it was so internalized and in me that I couldn't figure out what was going on. I had no words for it. When I was a teenager, at least I didn't know the word transgender. I don't think anyone around me knew the word transgender. I just knew that I wanted to be a woman, and I didn't know how to square that with my lived existence. So I graduated high school, I joined the Army, and I remember being in the recruiter's office. My recruiter was like, well, you have really high test scores, and so you can do anything you want. So, you should try this or that or this. And I thought, no, I want to go infantry. Because to me, going in the infantry was the most manly thing you could do. Like the U.S. Army infantry was the way to do it, because that way I would serve my country, but also I would strip this internal need of myself to be a woman. I got in the Army and I realized that this is not going away. I spent 6 years in the Army, and by the time I got out, it was just abundantly clear that this craving inside of me to be a woman was permanent. No matter how much I prayed, no matter how often I went to church, no matter how much I tried to, be a man or whatever it was, it just wasn't going to work. And I think that's something that a lot of trans people go through, is trying to calibrate these things. I have a lot of sympathy for trans people who have histories where they've gotten stuck in an environment where they can't be themselves, and so they've had to go in a different direction culturally. It's hard. It's really, really hard. So it got to the point. I want to say it was 2013, 2014, right about there, where I decided finally, I'm going to tiptoe out into the universe of queerness. I had a lot of queer friends, gay friends, lesbian, bisexual. I had a couple trans friends, not many. And I thought perhaps, as so many trans people do, is going through this process of validation. Like maybe I'm not trans. Maybe it's just, even though I have this strong need to be a woman and present as a woman and have a different body than I do, I don't know, maybe there's some other box I have to check in order to be authentically trans. It's the same trap that so many trans and non-binary people fall into. It's like internal gatekeeping, right? And so I identified as non-binary for a couple of years, just to try to see if I could find a happy medium. I was in the most wonderful relationship at the time with this very lovely cis woman who was from a more conservative background like me. And when I came out to her, I told her that I think I might, want to be a woman, and I don't know what to do. And I'm scared to death telling her this. And, it was hard because I think I had fantasized that because we loved each other so much that it would be very easy to tell her, and it would be very easy for her to accept me. And that's not the way it happened. I told her that, and she was kind, but I could also see immediately etched into her face was this sense of, I can't do that. I can't be with you if that's what you are trying to become someday. And so being non-binary or gender non-conforming for those 3 years or so was my attempt to find a happy medium, my attempt to have it all. And, I think in about 2017, I realized that was just not on living, we're going to live that life. I mean, it was okay in some ways, but it was just more of a compromise. And so in late 2017, I thought, I could wait until after Trump leaves office and come out when it's safer. And I don't expect anyone else to do this, but for me, it was this matter of all these trans people have come before me, and they've had the courage and the guts to really just take the plunge and be who they are. It wasn't easy for them. I'm not saying that decision is for everyone. I'm not saying anyone should go down that path, but for me, I just thought, I guess I felt I kind of owed it to their sacrifice to also take that plunge. And I owed it to myself, of course, my own internal happiness. And for that matter, I owed it to my loved ones, the people who I care about most, to be my authentic self.
I was raised to be a part of this community. My mother's a lesbian, and I've been marching in Pride parades since I was 6 years old. So I've been a part of this community my entire life, and I know I understand it. I think I have a unique perspective because being a straight white male in this world is one thing, but being able to be a witness to a marginalized people and being kind of part of it by proxy is a unique experience, and it's given me a unique perspective to be both an insider and an outsider at the same time. Because while there was a lot of adversity, it was people slandering my mother and then looking at me going, "But you're okay." So it was a unique perspective growing up, and part of that it made its way into the work, explicitly into the work where I talk about it, and so I would be here either way because it's an important aspect of who I am and my history and my current identity of being someone who tries to be on the right side of history and do everything I can to help make this world a little better.
Buen dia, this is Senator Bob Menendez, and you're tuned into the BRCSJ Social Justice Power Hour, coming to you every weeknight at 7 p.m. live from my good friends at the Bayard Rustin Social Justice via their Facebook virtual headquarters.
How was that for you? Did you know at the time, you're like, I'm going to make this into something, so I need to see through these emotional difficulties or the strife that I'm feeling?
I mean, yeah, I don't go into scenarios sort of hoping that there'll be stories. I mean, I'm sort of at a point in my life where I'd rather a boyfriend than a good story, but but writing and storytelling have certainly given me a way to control, to what's the way I want to say this? Like to have some agency and control over my life and what happens to me. I'm able to recalibrate events and sort of filter them through a humorous lens that helps me. That's a salve for me, whereas in an instance where a man, there've been countless hookups, and I don't blame these men because it's a hookup, and who am I trying to talk to them a whole bunch after it? But you're trying to connect, you're trying to and you're just not, and it doesn't happen, and that's okay. You shared something. That doesn't mean it wasn't intimate. I mean, you can have a great deal of intimacy with someone you don't know it all. That still happens, and that's beautiful and serves a purpose. But the kind of longing or loneliness I feel by being able to kind of filter that through a sieve of humor and perspective, it just gives me perspective. And if I'm able to make anyone else laugh or make anyone else feel not alone in what they're feeling and able to laugh at it, I think it's actually, that's my goal. Yeah. Did I answer your question?
You answered my question, and I'm thrilled at the answer. Satisfied, wholly and fully.
Okay, good.
I agree with you so strongly, and I think it's in some ways it's a shame though that we only loved him when he was down, when he was weak, when he couldn't talk anymore. We should have loved him when he was ferocious. We shouldn't have turned our backs on him. People forget that before the Olympic torch, Ali was struggling a little bit. He was forgotten because he wasn't as beautiful and he wasn't as loquacious, because Parkinson's had really limited his speech. He didn't have enough to do. He was bored at times. And then when he lit that torch, America rediscovered him and they embraced him again. But I just always caution people, let's not love Ali, the teddy bear. Let's remember Ali, the grizzly bear, because that's who we really should be celebrating. He wasn't a draft dodger. He was a war resistor. He was a pacifist. And, in the spirit of Bayard Rustin, who we are blessed to be honoring with this Power Hour, let's remember that he sacrificed. He was willing to risk everything. He didn't know he was going to be banned from boxing for 3 years. He thought he was giving up his whole career for his beliefs, for his religious and political beliefs.
It's almost like it's a magic trick, because it's a book set in the past, but utterly of the moment, while it's at the same time absolutely shows us our future and a way forward.
One of the things that was most surprising to me while writing The Prophets was that it felt so contemporary. Some of the reviewers kept saying that I was imposing a contemporary lens on a past. But the truth of the matter is, I was reading the slave narratives and simply conveying the same messages that Harriet Jacobs and Harriet Tubman and many others were conveying. The reason why it feels so contemporary is because so little has changed. So we're not on the cotton plantations picking cotton for massa anymore, but we are being gobbled up by the prison industrial complex in that same manner. We are not being whipped by massa and the overseers on the plantation anymore, but police officers are killing us on camera with glee. So racism, one of the most potent messages that I found in writing this book was that bigotry, all forms, but in this particular case, anti-Blackness, is so resilient that it never disappears. What it does is it morphs and molds itself into a fashion or a form that is acceptable to whatever time period it's in. So we would now look at, for example, someone in a Ku Klux Klan robe burning a cross on a Black person's lawn as, oh, that's awful. But we're not as offended by people storming the Capitol with Confederate flags and hanging a noose outside of the White House and things of that nature. So and I think the reason why racism or anti-Blackness and other bigotries have been so resilient is because Americans, all of us, me included, have this weird pathology where we don't confront our sins. We simply pretend that they're in the past. They're always in the past, no matter what date we are in, whatever the bigotry, oh, that's in the past. Because Americans, as Baldwin used to point out all the time, are almost obsessed with the idea of innocence. We connect innocence to goodness. So we say, we can't treat you as a human being unless you prove yourself innocent. And we know we're not innocent, but we'll never face that. We're in an utter state of denial. So we're going to treat ourselves as innocent even though we're not. And nothing you can do is going to prove your innocence to us. And it's this weird conundrum that's been happening for centuries in
I can
this
just
country.
say this, for example, about the battle flag. It's like, on the one hand, it, you know, for people who call themselves, you know, preservers of heritage, you know, that they're referring to a 4-year period, 1861 to 65, when the Civil War took place. But there's been an entire history since then, since 1865, in the ways in which these symbols are used. And so it's been used by the Ku Klux Klan, you know, for example. It's been used by segregationists who used it to taunt civil rights marchers. You know, it gets used by neo-Confederate groups. It gets, you know, and then it gets used. It was there in Charlottesville, white nationalists now. You know, that's the way. I mean, it continues to get used in various ways, but it's always related to, it's meant to intimidate and to bully people who are striving for racial justice, racial equality, and progress. Obviously, Ku Klux Klan, obviously. Segregationists, yes. Neo-Confederates, yes. White nationalists, yes. They're all using it, and it all has to do with like pushing back and bullying people around their efforts at racial equality.
So here's the question, though. So all those groups, right, are doing that as a barrier, as a fear tactic. Are the Dukes of Hazzard doing that? Is Gone with the Wind doing that? Was it Insidious? Were the people behind that what their message was?
No, I mean, it had been, you know, it's completely romanticized or thought to be innocuous. But like, this is where I come back to, you know, the African American community has always said things about that. I mean, if you read, you know, Black newspapers like the Chicago Defender at the time of this, you know, Gone with the Wind came out, they were not like down with that. They just were not, you know, you know, any of these, Birth of a Nation, you know, which was the silent film, you know, early version of this kind of thing, Gone with the Wind. But there were like tons of films that were set in the Old South before then. But, you know, the NAACP, you know, the American Negro Press Association, they were always pushing back against this kind of thing. I think the thing is like no one's listening. No one was listening and paying attention. You know, and I think, you know, if we were to go back and look, and it's not something I've researched, but I think if we were to go back and look at, you know, African American newspapers in the 1970s to get their view on Dukes of Hazzard, we might hear that. But again, people have not been listening. People have not been listening to what African Americans have had to say around the issue of monuments. And I see that over and over and over again. It was, you know, what happened last summer, you know, this past summer with the George Floyd moment and Black Lives Matter protests was something different. But as I said, African Americans have been saying it all along. It seemed to only like catch fire because other people, not necessarily people of color, finally like got on board with it.
But do you find yourself, so you said something that really struck me, that your great-great-grandfather, and I'm not sure if I put enough greats in that, built houses for his 11 kids.
Right.
Do you picture yourself ever at the writing table? Those are your houses. Those are your kids. Writing those books, writing those words, those pages. Are those the houses you're building for your community, for your family?
No, I don't, but I'm going to use that from now on. I mean, what I do picture is that those were my houses, that legacy. It's coming from that legacy that allows me to do what I do today. that allows me to think that I can do this, that allows me to be confident in doing this, that allows me to move through life understanding that I am the greatest, not because I am better than anyone, but because no one is better than me. That comes out of a tradition and in the continuum and the tradition of my great-great-grandfather, March Corprew, building 11 houses. So I recognize that, and I understand there's a responsibility that comes with that legacy. And also, I guess it's DNA. It's an empowerment. Now, as it relates to your specific analogy, that's brilliant. Yeah, like I said, I'm going to use that. I guess it makes sense that these are my legacies that I'm leaving, that I'm building for not just my two daughters, but kids the world over, for young people the world over. If the world is not such a beautiful place sometimes, how is it going to become better? Well, the children are going to make it better. And in order for them to make it better, they've got to be able to think it better. In order for them to think it better, they've got to imagine it better. Where does that imagination come from? I posit that it comes between the pages of a book. And my goal as a writer is to infuse a literature that is first page turning and entertaining, but second is educational and inspirational and empowering, so that kids can begin to imagine a better world and make it so. So they can, as Langston Hughes would have said, so they can dream a world. So yeah, I guess these are my houses I'm building. I love it. That's got me inspired right now to go write something. I may have to take a break and come back.
Yeah, you can do it in 45
Hello,
minutes.
my name is Samantha. I'm a queer high school student. I've been connected to the Bayard Rustin Center for over a year now, and they've accepted, supported me, and taught me so much. Through their good works, including their activism, community events, online live streams, and more, they support and lift up the voices of all of our beautifully diverse communities. My experience with the Bayard Rustin Center started in the fall of 2019 when I reached out to Robert, their chief activist. I saw that schools in my school district have gay student alliances where students can connect to share their ideas and advocate together. But not every school and community has clubs and organizations like this for youth. And especially in such an isolating and stressful time like this pandemic, I felt that it was essential to build community among young people, both those who identify as LGBTQ and those who are willing to learn more and be better allies. Robert and Carol at the Bayard Rustin Center helped me plan and hold an online gathering to bring together queer youth and allies, and they made it possible for me to reach interested youth from all over New Jersey. The center has taught me so much about what it means to be proud and how to use my voice for good. They have shown me what it means to be truly accepting, and they practice that in every aspect of their good works. The center brings together people from all over their community, and they inspire us all and provide a safe and creative space where everybody can be themselves. They hold meaningful events, do important advocacy work, and educate us all to be more accepting and aware. The Bayard Rustin Center welcomes each and every person and family who walks into their doors, regardless of their identities, their background, who they love, or where they are from. The world needs more of the unconditional acceptance and kindness that every person at the Bayard Rustin Center holds for the people in their community. I could not be more grateful to them. Thank you.
Sure. So I think Jim Henson is probably the best example of that, because Jim, first of all, is exactly the way you want him to be. He's genuinely kind. He's genuinely caring. He is a creative force. He loved to inspire that in others. He was non-judgmental of others, almost to a fault. Wore his heart. Didn't really wear his heart on his sleeve. His wife did that. Jim was conflict averse. Didn't want to have the fight on anything, but really loved talent. Talent for Jim drove everything. And he would do these recruiting sessions at the Muppet Workshop about every 10 months. And during one of those work sessions, he came upon a 19-year-old performer named Richard Hunt, who was openly gay in New York. And this is in the early 70s, back when that could get you in real trouble. And Jim hired Richard and Frank Oz. And this joke I always use with Robert, I say, Sinatra told me never to name drop, but I have to name drop Frank Oz on this. Frank Oz says, way he described Richard Hunt, he said his proficiency as a puppeteer wasn't necessarily the best, but it just didn't matter because he was such a force of nature. And I love that description, because if you watch characters Richard Hunt does, he does Scooter on the Muppet Show, but like he was these really crazy characters. Oh gosh, I can't. All of a sudden, I'm spacing the name of the one that used to bang his head on the piano. That's Richard Hunt's character. Richard Hunt is just these crazy characters. He was this, he would put a puppet on his arm and stick it in anybody's face and start talking to them. He was probably one of the funniest, most spontaneous performers they had. Jim absolutely adored him. Just didn't mind that he was openly gay. Didn't care that he was openly gay. Loved his talent. And the children, Jim's kids, to a person, Jim had 5 children, all to this day still talk about how fun Richard Hunt was. Not just how funny he was, how much fun he was. And John Henson talked about how he thought Richard was just the coolest guy. And Jim would take him out on these yacht trips. Jim loved expensive vacations. And John said he always wanted to hang around with Richard. And wherever Richard was, John wanted to be there. So just absolutely adored Richard. One of my favorite stories about Jim and Richard, and this gets to Jim's personality and sort of his ability and proclivities as a manager, is they had been doing the Muppet Show in London for about 2 years. And the Muppet Show, when it first started, was really hard for them to get guests. They were the little show that could, but they didn't get guests as easily in those early seasons. So it was a very big deal to treat their guests well and to not talk about them behind their backs. And at one point, word got out that Richard had possibly badmouthed one of their guests behind their back, and it got into the newspaper. And so David Laser, who was Jim's producer, said, "Okay, Jim, we're going to have to call Richard in here, and we're going to do, there's no good cop, bad cop here. This is going to be bad cop, bad cop. He's going to come into my office. I'm going to yell at him, and then I'm going to turn him over to you. And you really got to let him have it, because this is unacceptable. This could cost us guests." So Jim and David had connecting doors between their offices, and Richard comes in, and Richard's still only like 21, 22 years old. Comes in, David Laser lays into him. Richard starts crying. He's very upset, very contrite, and he says, "I'm sorry, Richard, I got to turn you over to Jim now." And he opens the door, and Jim gets out from behind the desk and comes over and just wraps Richard in a bear hug. Just can't do it. Can't yell at Richard. He can't be the bad cop at all. There was just no way it was going to happen. And later on, David Laser tells Jim, he says, "You have to stop calling your employees family. You can't fire family." But Jim just could not do it.
Absolutely. I am unabashedly and unashamed to stand up in any room and make the make the declaration that I am a Black woman, and I am not afraid to stand up in any room with anybody and say Black, 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 Black. I've been like that my entire life. When I came to the New Jersey General Assembly, Senator Ron Rice, who's been in the Senate for probably over 30 years, he is the chair of the New Jersey Legislative Black Caucus. And when I was a freshman, along with other freshmen in the legislature, I remembered at one meeting he said, "Don't be ashamed to stand up on that chamber floor and say Black, Black, Black." I've done that during the 16 years that I was in the General Assembly. It's an uncomfortable conversation for some people, but life isn't about being comfortable, and making social progress and achieving social justice isn't always comfortable. But I never had a problem doing that. I never ever did. And, I have often, in certain environments I've been in, I've been viewed as an outlier. I've been viewed as, a person that's not going to go along with the program. But being an outlier, being a person not going along with the program, there is one thing that I have. I've got my knowledge. I've got my expertise. I do my homework. I dot my I's. I cross my T's. And those that I have had to work with through the years that possess a different ideology than mine, I really, really believe they just came to the conclusion, listen, she's not going away anywhere. She's a thorn in our side, so we might as well just deal with her and work with her. I think that is what my story is.
And it's a beautiful story, and it's so empowering.
Yeah, I think the default setting for so much of masculinity is terror. It is even that stupid quote, macho man, I want to be a macho man, or I've got to be a macho man. That's rooted in a kind of terror. That's rooted in a fear of not being something that you're meant to be. So much of masculinity is about projection, in particular of strength. And what that projection is trying to do is cover up whatever weakness you may feel. And we all feel weak, We at times feel strong, of course. But there's a central fragility to humanity that probably comes from the fact that, we're these hairless creatures that don't have teeth or claws. We're pretty fragile creatures. And so much of our lives as men is about projecting strength. And white men in particular, we have built up a pretty awesome structure that keeps us in power, which is to say to keep us sort of radiating this strength. And what we're seeing over the last however many decades and continue to see is other groups saying, wait, hold on a second. I kind of want a seat at the table too. And that is really threatening to some guys because they think or they feel that if somebody else is encroaching on their territory, what they perceive to be as their territory, that there will be less and less territory. My argument is that the opposite actually happens, that more horizons grow for us, more opportunities start to exist when we include more people in the entire process of being human. When we open up our frontiers, we see there's ever more frontiers in front of us. And the result for a lot of guys is instead of being open and letting go of that fear, they're actually retreating and feeling ever more fearful. And that's creating a lot of problems, I think.
So how much, and forgive me if I'm overstepping here, you can say that, it's not a subject you want to...
You're overstepping.
All right. I find the death penalty is the epitome of that because I can't fathom how anybody could think that's the solution just because it's so barbaric.
Right. And, look, it's been a long time to create even a small shift in public opinion about the death penalty. And, like I said, when I was younger and when I was a crime reporter, and I would sit in victims' homes, it was survivors of people who had been killed. I understood what they were thinking. I didn't necessarily agree, but when you see the grief and the rage, people's logic may be blinded. And I think just about every time I've read a story about someone being executed, not everyone, but most, the people say, it hasn't brought so-and-so back. It hasn't really brought closure to us. The hurt is going to remain there forever. And the states have spent an extraordinary amount of money housing a person who they're eventually going to kill, spending money fighting appeals, right? I mean, these are multi-million-dollar cases that go on and have gone on for decades. To what end? To take Lisa Montgomery to the federal prison in Terre Haute, Indiana, and kill her. What good did that do to anybody? Nothing.
Well, I've always written a lot about abortion. It's been something I've written about since some year like 1980. So I thought it would be interesting to write a longer treatment. But also I really wanted to put it in a different context instead of the context of necessary tragedy, to put it in the context of, no, this is a good thing for society. It's really good for people to have children intentionally instead of just when some random sperm gets in there. And maybe this is a tiny bit controversial. It isn't good for men to father children that they're not going to be involved in, to just have this all be this big accident of biology. That's not great. And it isn't good for children to it's much, let's just put it this way, it's much better for children to come into the world when their parents are able to take good care of them, and able to give them the things that children need, stability and attention and all that good stuff.
And introspection, I think it's good for us to read about that history and to study that history, because I think there are a lot of lessons in that and things for me, you know, frankly, you know, I think about what they went through and can't even imagine, you know, just what it must have been like to be transgender or gay or bisexual in the 1950s and 60s. And yet these folks led a movement where, you know, last year we were all, for those of us who were fortunate enough to go to New York City and celebrate in the streets. And I personally got exceedingly emotional when we walked by the Stonewall Inn itself, that President Obama made the park there a national monument, the first LGBTQ national monument. But to me, it really hit me because it was like, my goodness, it's been 50 years since that night. And, you know, so many of those folks, you know, unfortunately passed natural. And then, of course, you know, terribly many we lost to AIDS in the 80s. And just to think, like, if they could see us now, and I personally, in my belief, think they are seeing us and we are a reflection of them and that joy. And I'm so proud of that. And it also inspires me for what's to come.
When the pandemic struck in March, I didn't know what to do. I mean, how do you caricature somebody? How can you, as a caricaturist, how do you deal with that? And I just came to the feeling that it made a difference for me to draw the faces of the people being lost in the pandemic. So I started to do it every day, and you can see them all if you go to my public Facebook page, which is facebook.com/Steve Brodner. And you can scroll down, start in March, and then come right up to now. I'm going to do another one tonight. I think about people getting hit in the eye with canisters during protests. Turns out there are many such people who have been blinded. Here was Breonna Taylor, who was shot 8 times because the police entered her home by mistake. And her boyfriend was upset about this. He had a gun, and the police, instead of figuring out what they were doing and who these people really were, just started to fire. She was shot 8 times in bed. And this comes at a time of, as we all know, multiple examples of extreme police brutality and violence and not caring about people, lives not mattering to them. So yeah, I do one of these every day now, and it's come to be called The Greater Quiet.
Honor to be here. All of those names of those amazing people that are part of this community that you've built. It's just an honor to be amongst them.
That's the first thing I wanted to throw out there especially for our viewing audience, so they understand this community that we've built at the Power Hour is just a microcosm of the community of authors that seem to really support each other, especially Black queer authors. And it's an amazing thing because it's a very competitive field. I mean, you're looking to sell books, but you each, without hesitation, so amplify each other, and it's so beautiful to see.
Yeah, I mean, and it's kind of by necessity in some ways, but also I think it's just kind of what Blackness does. And one of the lines in the book that I really love is that Blackness is a meritocracy that doesn't require suppression. And I'm talking about how, like, when older Black folks are dancing, doing line dances, and they're trying to like show each other out and everything. But even in that little space, I think it's just a reflection of while we're trying to show up and while we can be competitive, there's still this awareness that you don't have to put someone else down, or that person doesn't have to feel less than for you to shine. And so, yeah, it's definitely something that has been carrying me through this whole book process as a Black book community, particularly with queer authors like Robert, who you mentioned earlier, and George Johnson, and Darnell Moore have been super supportive of this, but not just limited to that. Kiesi Layman is a huge supporter of almost every Black author that I know has had who's good has had a blurb from Kiese, and I'm meeting new authors now, like Disha Filia of Secret Lives of Church Ladies, who's just been amazingly supportive throughout this time. And I think Kiese posted something about this earlier today, that there's not really an infrastructure for Black authors to succeed in the same traditional ways that white authors do. I mean, we're fighting for a very shrinking, I think, now space that we thought was expanding over the summer with the whole George Floyd murder, or with George Floyd's murder, and everything that came out of that. But I think slowly things are just turning back to normal. And we have to create that space to celebrate ourselves, especially with stories like this, which I wrote specifically for other Black people. I hope that it resonates with the larger community, but I know for a fact that there are going to be some people who are just not going to get it, and that's fine. And so there has to be some space for us to be able to tell and support our stories, and speak the language that we're used to speaking, and we just come together and
how do they empower themselves to overcome that?
Right. That's a great question. And remember, this is the 60s. This is like right when feminism and civil rights and all these things are kind of cooking. I talk about them swimming in this subversive soup of, all these movements that now to us just seem like, of course, but then they were seen as very radical. And these are conservative military wives that we're talking about. So this is really out of their comfort zone to speak about this publicly, to bring this out, to, throw off kind of the military protocols and bond together as a group, going out in public and talking about this, which, by the way, we'll talk a little bit about Lyndon Johnson and the keep quiet policy, which was, an old policy. I can't blame that on Lyndon Johnson, but saying if your husband, son, brother is shot down, is taken prisoner, or is missing, you are to say nothing. You are to keep quiet and not discuss this with anyone as long as they are imprisoned, which in previous wars where prisoners were held for shorter periods of time, maybe sort of was possible. These guys were kept as long as 8 years. This was like not right. And for various reasons, keeping quiet was killing these guys. What we needed was to go public, as the women did, to use the media to get the message out, which the media was very helpful to them disseminating this message. And these are, remember, conservative military wives. This is against all their training to speak out, to have a voice. But they do it. They decide they don't have a choice. They have to do it, and they make the right choice. That is empowering because they are going out, they are lobbying, they're being international diplomats. They are coding secret letters to their husbands in prison, which is a really fun, I call it the Jane Bond part of the book, which I love because I love spy stuff anyway. So it's very cool, how they go out and do all this. So, I mean, these are really sophisticated international lobbyists, spies, and diplomats. And this is a process that takes time, but it along the way empowers them. And they're not going to ever identify, by the way, as feminist. I made the mistake of assuming that. Never assume. That's what I learn all the time. Just never make that assumption. So no, they are pro-women. They are all about women, but they did not identify as feminists because, as I learned in the research about 2 years down the road, at that time, this military community associated feminism with communism and the far left. And the communists are the ones torturing their husbands. So to them, feminism was a bad word. To me, that's just what I am. I didn't even think about it that way, but it completely changed my perspective on why they did not identify with that cause. Now, later, some of them become feminists down the road, Sybil Stockdale particularly. But at the time, see, that was how it was viewed. I had no idea about that. So, long roundabout answer to, I don't even know if I really answered your original question, but I did want to talk about keep quiet, go public, which I think resonates today. It's so topical. I wrote this really after it was done, before Me Too happened, but it had so many parallels with that whole thing, with Black Lives Matter, with all of these, keeping quiet, tamping people down that have something important to say, but somebody does not want them to say it. So it's resonated with a lot of people, I think, in that way as
this
well.
Amazing speech by Martin Luther King. And you know that Rustin was advising him, you know, all through the 60s. Rustin was his right-hand man. These two guys were very close, and they thought very, very similarly. And you can trace Rustin's ideas echoing through King's speeches and vice versa. But King gives a wonderful speech at the very end of the Selma to Montgomery March. Okay, this is 1965. This is actually, I think, the week before I was born. It might be like 2 days before I was born. And King is at the end of this great march, in some ways the most the triumphant moment of the civil rights movement. You know, the Voting Rights Act has been passed by Congress. It's this great success. He's standing in front of the Capitol building in Montgomery, Alabama. The governor at the time is this complete asshole, George Wallace. But here's King in his moment of triumph. And he gives this wonderful speech. It's one of his all-time greats. You can watch it on YouTube. And in the middle of it, he gives a shout out to the populist movement of the 1890s. And he talks about what they did and what they tried to do and how they were beaten and how they failed. And he was advised, and he gives an explicit call out again to this guy, C. Van Woodward, who wrote the introduction to the Rustin collection of essays that I'm holding up here. King gives a shout out to Woodward, and then gives a very brief history of the populist movement that is exactly, clinically, historically correct, which is like, that never happens anymore. It's amazing. It's amazing. And then he goes on one of his great sort of, one of his great images, one of his great sort of flights of oratorical brilliance, where he says after they crushed the Bourbon Democrats crushed populism, and they gave the poor white farmer instead, when he couldn't make a living, his life was incredibly difficult, and he had been looking for some kind of fairness and fair treatment for farmers, and the Bourbon Democrats gave him Jim Crow. And when he cried out for the bread that he couldn't afford, he ate Jim Crow. And it's this brilliant image where he describes, he says Jim Crow is a psychological bird that he gave to the poor white Southerners so that they could say, no matter how bad off I am, at least I'm white. And this was the sort of psychological gift of Jim Crow. And I can't do it justice because it's one of King's really great speeches. The only way to do it justice is to go watch it for yourself, because then he goes on this, watch it.
Something
It's
that
fantastic.
I've worked really hard on, and it's something that I try to do pretty purposefully. I mean, like a lot of the work that I do and that I talk about doing is about this idea of like spreading queer joy, about radical joy, and using that as an emotional and tonal tactic to figure out like what are all these different kinds of like emotional versions of activism. Like we can put something beautiful and exciting into the world, and that can be something that creates positive change too. And it's all about just kind of like coming at the same issues with so many different strategies. And this is my strategy. It's about, helping fill the gap for young people, particularly early learners. So I'm really talking to like pre-K through like early elementary school. And it's something, I didn't have this work when I was a kid. And I think a lot of what I try and do is make the work that I wish that I had. And, maybe I could have skipped a lot of like the struggle of my like early like tween and teen years, and could have kind of come into my identity a little sooner and understood myself. I didn't come out as non-binary until I was like 26. And, that's a lot of years of not understanding my gender. And I'm still kind of, aren't we all still kind of figuring it out? So yeah, I think it's important. And it gets overlooked a lot of the time, I think. It's okay to be gay. We are different in many ways. Doesn't matter if you're a boy, girl, or somewhere in between. We all are part of one big family. Gaming's happy. Queer kid stuff. You are enough. You're a queer kid stuff.
Hey you, it's Harmonica Sunbeam. Want to do something wonderful for the people around you and people that you may not even know? Support the Bayard Rustin Center for Social Justice. Support them. They have great programming online, and and they want to continue to do these wonderful things of helping people, supporting, educating, entertaining, and they need your help. So if you can, help them out. We appreciate it.
Who doesn't love the fabulous Ms. Harmonica Sunbeam? And I dare say, I truly believe we're the only community center that has a drag queen in residence. And we are so proud of our relationship, nay, our friendship with Harmonica. Thank you all so much for joining us tonight in virtual community to hear these stories, to bear witness to these truths. Please do join us tomorrow night for our last night of highlights, which is going to be, we're going to change it up a bit. It's going to be performance highlights, all the musicians and poets and performers and dancers, all the folks who have come out and shared time, energy, and spirit on our virtual stage over the past year. And then thereafter, join us each and every night, 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific. The Social Justice Power Hour will be here for you. Please do be here with us. Until tomorrow, my friends, please, be good to each other. Be good to your families, chosen or otherwise. And most especially, and many of us don't take enough stock in this, myself included, please, be good to yourselves. You need it, and we need you here with us. Much love and respect, y'all.
Need in every community a group of angelic troublemakers.
Hey, Robert Martin, thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
So can I tell you, we're close enough now, and I'll share this with the audience too. When you call me Robert Martin, it's literally one of my new favorite thing in the world. I love that. For those of you who don't know, I shared with Peniel that my name, Robert, is in honor of Robert Kennedy, and my middle name is Martin Luther King, because my parents were very, very wonderful people. And I carry that honor every day in the work I do. And Peniel, you're the only one that has come to call me Robert Martin, and I truly dig it the most. So thank you, my friend.
Oh, no problem. It's an extraordinary name, man. It's a great name.
Awesome.